Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. I'm your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my ukulele-loving co-host, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you?
I am hanging in there. I just got off a flight yesterday. I'm an old man now, and I don't like it anymore. And actually, we were on Alaska Air. I'm not going to go into great detail, but it was difficult to be unhappy with them. They were nice and pleasant people. The plane was spacious and new and clean. The whole experience, there was no reason to complain. Yet, here I am.
I'll tell you where I'm at with air travel, just because I'm old and ornery. I'm going to Nashville in 2 weeks, and I am driving. 10 hours, baby. I'm driving because I can stretch my legs whenever I want to. And I actually get to self-select the humans that I interact with for longer than 5 minutes on my journey, which is all good. Speaking of interacting with humans, I'd like to thank Parker Mouthpieces for providing the hosting for the Brass Junkies and for being our friends. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist model tuba mouthpiece and the Lance LaDuke model euphonium mouthpiece. You can find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hey, guess what just launched today, Lance?
SpaceX?
I knew you were going to say that.
I didn't.
Brand new Pedal Note Media store. pedalnotemedia.com/store.
What can you buy in it?
Well, you can buy a bunch of stuff. You should go check it out. A bunch of Brass Junkies trinkets and whatnot, but like some actual nice stuff. We abandoned our Zazzle store because it was basically like a bazaar, but not in a cool way. And we've got some really neat stuff. And we're going to be donating. For this month, we're donating 100% of profits. And for this month, it's July 20th. If you listen to this when it's being released, the rest of July, but then all of August, we are donating all profits to Cancer Blows. So every single penny that we make off of that, it's all like make on demand. And so they take their cut. Every single penny that we get, we are donating to Cancer Blows. So you can head to pedalnotemedia.com/store. And buy. My favorite is the spit rag.
That's pretty funny.
There's like with a target. You just say you have. I'm not going to describe it anymore. You have to go see it. It's hilarious. pedalnotemedia.com/store. 100% of profits through, and we're going to actually rotate through the charity. So if you're listening to this in the future, it'll be marked on the store. But we are going to be giving all of it to Cancer Blows, the incredible charity that Ryan Anthony, who is dearly missed. It's hard to believe we just passed a year without him, but his charity and its incredible impact live on. And also, speaking of incredible impact, not speaking of incredible impact, but our summer workshop from last summer is up. If you go to brassjunkies.academy, we are selling the archive. It's 22 hours, plus it comes with, depending on your instrument, you get to sign up for a specific inside the practice room with variety. Just go check it out. There's like an astonishing list of guests, and it's at a huge price discount from last summer. That's going to be available for the entire summer. So we had a wonderful conversation here with one of the newest euphoniums here in Washington, D.C., Alison Mahovsky. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, that was very fun. I got to relive some memories.
Yeah.
Some good ones even.
Yeah. And without further ado, let us get to the conversation that we had with euphonium player Alison Mahovsky.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more content by the Brass Junkies, just click on the like and subscribe button. You'll have an opportunity to see some of the greatest brass players in the world, and Andrew and me.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. We are joined today by one of the newest people in Washington, D.C., and her name is Alison Mahovsky. Alison, how are you?
I'm great. How are you guys?
We're fantastic. I'm talking to two euphonium players. I'm living the dream here.
Dear diary, it finally happened.
So Alison is in the Air Force Ceremonial Band. Is that like the official? Is that the order of the words, or is it the ceremonial band of the? What is the official title?
Starts with the.
We're the ceremonial brass.
Thank you.
So not a band. Well, I mean, we are a band, but it's brass.
I get. See, I had a feeling, and I honestly didn't know what I was getting wrong, but I was like, that sounds almost right, but not quite right. So you are in, and you joined in 2020. When did you start?
I went to basic training in August of 2020, and I was supposed to go in March of 2020, and I won my job in September of 2019. So everything just kind of got swept back a little bit. But I got here to DC in October of 2020.
Wow.
Okay, so hold on.
Yeah, let's start here, and then we'll go backwards, because you have a very fascinating backstory. But like doing all this in the middle of a pandemic, I'm fascinated.
Mm-hmm. So you go to Lackland Air Force Base.
Yes.
And
everybody
what
in the
is
Air Force
going
goes
on
to
in
Lackland.
So March, April, May, June, July. So 6 months into the pandemic, what does basic training look like during a pandemic?
Different from what it normally looks like. My husband was active duty 5 years before I got in, so I know what basic training was like from his experience, and they had all kinds of different things and protocols that they were following. Of course, all the social distancing, masks, everything like that. All of that was in effect. Excessive cleaning. And they had, usually within a squadron at basic training, you have several different flights and different stages of basic training. So in your squadron, you could have somebody in 0 week, you could have another dorm that's in like their 7th week of basic training. But just to kind of keep everybody in the same cycle, we were all in the same week of basic training. So I think we had about 15 flights of everybody in the same week. So it functions a lot differently than how it usually would, just because there's not as much flexibility and kind of people to kind of take over different roles and things like that. Everybody's kind of on all the time. So,
well, and so one of the things that, so I went to basic training before you were born, and when we were there, one of the things they would threaten us with was to recycle you.
Oh, yeah.
And so you were around. So recycling meant that you could be 85% of the way through. You could be in week 5, and then if you did something egregious, they could recycle you back to week 0, and then they would just make you do it over again. And they had these awesome, scary stories that they would tell you about people who did this and that, and then they got recycled.
Oh, we had recycles.
Did you? So
what on the day of graduation too.
Really?
So, yep.
So.
They weren't playing around.
What?
So.
Who did what?
Yeah, right.
I don't need names.
I can't say. It was. I shouldn't say. So
can you? It was something pretty bad.
Give us a broad category. Was it something that was said? Was it a gesture? Was it like some sort of physical demonstration of displeasure?
It was like actions that were kind of dealt with periodically throughout all of basic training, and everyone thought like it was like done and over, but like it kept happening. And so then it like exploded the last week we were there. And of course, all of us just want to get out and just go home. And we're having to have meetings with leadership and things like that because things were still going on. But they got recycled, and that's
okay,
the
so
last
I
know.
A million questions.
So they basically did back-to-back basic trainings. I mean, essentially, minus like 24 hours, or like
some people, the people that got recycled the day of graduation got sent back 2 weeks.
Okay.
Some people, they give you like PT tests. Like you do one PT test your first week just to kind of see where you're at. And then you do another one the 3rd week, and then another one the 5th week. So you keep like taking them, and if it's like not getting better. I thought I was on airplane mode. I just got a call.
I'm sorry,
That's
I shouldn't
weird.
have called.
But if you fail your PT test, you kind of have other shots to get better. And then in the 5th week, if you don't pass, then you get thrown back. Another 2 weeks, because they give you another chance. So you get lots of chances to pass the PT test. And then if you don't pass, they send you back home, and then they tell you can come back. But if you come back, you have to start all over again. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of basic training questions. Please bear with me because it's just like it was such a hilarious and ridiculous time of my life.
I don't think that Allison may know that Lance, way back when, was in the Air Force Band in D.C., and so he went through basic training. But again, it was like a long time ago. So yeah.
Oh, I know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that.
I wasn't.
It's on the plaque,
I-
Andrew.
They call
Dr.
getting
Bowman.
they call getting
Dr.
recycled
Bowman-
is called pulling a LaDuke. So
That's
yeah,
right.
that's the. I'm sorry. Go
Dr.
ahead.
Bowman does a really good job of making sure we know our euphonium history when you used to go through UNT's studio. So you know everything about everyone. So
You're a
There's
part
the
of.
do's and the don'ts.
You're a
I'm in
part
the
of-
don'ts.
You're a part of euphonium history, and now you have a bunch of ukuleles hanging behind you. I like it.
True. Okay, so were you in the drum and bugle corps?
no, they didn't have it during
They
basic
didn't have
training.
one. Oh, see, that
Yeah.
was the only saving grace, because if they knew which musicians were coming down, and the folks who ran the D&B would pull you aside, like there'd be like, Airman blah, come meet, and then you would come over there like, hey, we're at the drum and bugle corps. Things are much cooler over there. We're gonna get you out of there. Okay, get back in line. And we're like, okay. And so that got you out of KP. You didn't have to do the kitchen patrol stuff.
Yeah,
So-
we had I had a couple visits to the band building at Lackland, and it was just to do training and stuff like that to get my government travel card set up. And so I didn't get to do drum and bugle corps. I didn't get pulled out for all of that, whatever. And it was like so weird going to their building, and they're just normal people, and some of them I know because my husband was in a regional band, and so it was just weird to like walk up to their building and then people greet you and you don't know what to say, and you're like, hello, sir, and you don't know if you're supposed to be formal, and they kind of laugh and they're like, you can be normal here, it's okay. And so it was just a really weird experience doing that. But there was also this hilarious time when I was in a different squadron. Usually all of the band people get processed through the 321st training squadron, and I went through the 320th. So they had never seen a band person ever in their life. And they actually would make fun of the 321st because they were like the band nerds, blah, 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 blah. And so I went through the 320th, and my MTIs didn't really like know. I had to like tell them like, hey, at this week, you have to send me here. You have to make me an appointment so I can go book my flight because I don't go to tech school and things like that. Like, you have to kind of help me out here. And they didn't really know what I was talking about, but they
Let me pause
so...
you for a second. So what happens in quote-unquote normal basic training is that about 2/3 of the way through basic training, you get your assignment for where you're going to go to tech school. And it's if you're going to be a pilot, well, not a pilot. If you're going to be a mechanic, or you're going to be in supply, or you're going to be a computer person, then you go to a technical school, which will be another 8, 10, 12 weeks after you're done there. But if you win one of the premier bands in Washington, D.C., as soon as you're done, your next assignment is to your gig. There's no tech school thing. And so they don't know what to do with you. So pick it up from there.
Yes. So they didn't really know what was going on with my particular situation. And they got confused because someone reached out to them from the band of the West, they're the band at Lackland, and said, like, hey, I think they said something like, we're going to need to take her for something. And my MTIs interpreted it as like I was leaving the flight. And this was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks in. So like things are starting to kind of normalize and you're getting to know people in your flight and stuff like that. And it's like, all right. And I went through like almost every single leadership role in basic training, and then ended up being dorm chief at the end of it. And at the time, I think I was just PT monitor or something like that. So I didn't really do anything that great in importance. And they were kind of like eyeballing me to make me an element leader, because they would like fire the element leaders if they weren't doing what they were supposed to do or whatever. And they like had us all in the day room, and it was so dramatic, and our MTI was just like, one of us is leaving and going to another flight. And in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, who is it?
Who's that?
And like, I was so dumb. I was like, who could it be? And they were like, Mahovsky's leaving us. And I was just like, oh, it's me. And then in my head, I was like, well, that's kind of good, because things are starting to get a little crazy, and I could really do with like maybe removing myself from the situation entirely. And I was like, that wouldn't be so bad to just like start fresh. So we went like the whole day. Like, we've only known each other for like 2-3 weeks at this point, and everyone's just like, oh man, Mahovsky, we're gonna miss you, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. And like, it was just such a weird vibe. And then we're sitting in the dining facility, and my MTI comes up to the table, and I'm thinking like, what did I do?
That's
like, just leave me alone. Yeah, like I don't want any trouble.
Because in the chow hall, unless it's, I mean, it was 9,000 years ago that I was there, but it used to be the case that you would stand in line, you would hold your tray, and you would shuffle. You didn't make any eye contact with anybody.
Yep.
And then you would go stand at a table and put your, I can't even remember if you put your tray down. The tables were all four-sided, and you would stand there, and then
at
you
attention.
would at attention. And if there were not three other people there, you would stand there until the three other people came there, and then one of the persons would say, "Airman, be seated," or something like that, right? And then
they didn't do that part anymore.
Then you put your tray down, and then you would sit down, and then you just like throw your food down as fast as you can. Try to bring no attention to yourself at all, and then take the most circuitous route. Don't look anywhere. Eat all the food, and then take the most circuitous route to take your tray back. And don't go. There was a thing called, was the snake pit there?
Oh yeah.
So the snake pit was like this row of all of the drill instructors were all set up in this, like, it was like being at the world's worst wedding. And the entire
head table was like
entire
bonkers.
head table is just, and you could just see them like, who are we gonna get? And of course someone would drop a thing, or like somebody who shouldn't have been would go get like another piece of cake or another piece of ice cream, and then they would they would just descend on them, and just it was just horrible, the things they would say and do, and you're just like sitting there. And of course, do you wear glasses? Do you have contacts?
No.
So we had BCGs. Everybody was issued BCGs, which are called birth control glasses, because these things were, I mean, they were horrific. They were scary, like terrible. You're just like, it was just, I just have nothing but vivid memories of all of this stuff. So anyway, your TI comes to you in Chow Hall,
table.
which is that's like, okay, this is where I die. This is the day that I die. Because you see them coming, you're like, oh, there can't be our table. Oh no, it's me.
Yeah,
so
and I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna get lit up for something. Like, I don't know what I did. And then like the craziest thing is when people are getting yelled at, it's so hard not to like look and see what they're doing. So you're just staring at your tray the whole time, like shaking, like, all right, like, I want to know what they're doing, so I don't do it, but I can't look at them, so you're like listening, like,
that sounds so
awful. It sounds. Oh yeah. It's like, it is so like psychological. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. But I will say, I went in knowing the game essentially. Yeah. Like, I know they're gonna yell at you, and everyone said, it's more about, you have to listen to what they're saying and not how they're saying it, and realize that the reason they're screaming at one person is so that they only have to make that correction one time and not for the entire flight. Like, if each person got that individual attention, I mean, basic training would be way longer than it already is. So, like, yeah, they're yelling at you, but it's not to, like, embarrass you. It's so that everyone else can hear. So,
that was a side benefit. So it was, attention to detail, following instructions in a specific order, and supporting everybody else. Yeah. And that was really like, if you could do those three things, which doesn't sound like that hard, but I met, and I'm sure you met some people for whom this was an amazingly daunting challenge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was crazy. But anyway, he comes to the table, and he, like, leans on the table, and he's like, and we only had 2 to a table because it was COVID. So you would sit, like, kind of across from someone, and, like, eventually, like, when you get to know people in your flight, like, you'd kind of have, like, a system of, like, somebody would get yelled at, and you'd kind of smirk and, like, look at the person across from you, like, oh, I bet that's so-and-so,
Right.
or, like, whatever. So you kind of, like, can read the person across the table, and I'm, like, trying to look at the person across the table from me, like, okay, what's going on here? And they're just, like, staring down at their plate. And I was like, oh, man, like, okay. And I don't know, am I supposed to look at my MTI? Am I not supposed to? Because in the real world, I, like, make eye contact with people I have conversations with. So I just kind of sat there and, like, stared off into space. And he was like, you aren't leaving our flight. They're just going to, like, take you out, like, for appointments every now and then. So you're staying with us. And I was like, okay. And then he walked away. And then, like, the person across from me then looked up and went, like, okay, like, we still got her. But it was just like...
So is there no talking at all, like, during the meal?
No.
No speaking. You have, I think it's, like, something like 10 minutes to eat. But they fill the tables in, like, back to front. And then people kind of, like, cycle out, and when they get up, it's like if the table in front of you gets up, it's almost like, okay, if I don't get up shortly after they get up, then the people on the other side of me are going to get up, and I'm going to look like I'm taking my sweet time, even though I'm not.
You just
and that
throw it down. You just, like, sit down and pour it in.
Well, it's kind of the benefit of when they did make me dorm chief, I ate last. So I could kind of determine, like, all right, like, I'm watching the time. It's okay. Like, nobody's going to be coming behind me, essentially. So it did get a little better after that. But
how bad is the food? I mean, I'm sure it's not Michelin rated, but is it, like, decent, or is it horrendous?
I remember thinking the food
wasn't too bad.
No, it wasn't the worst part of the experience.
Okay.
No, and they have a lot of options. So we had, like, a couple vegetarians in our flight and things like that. So there's a lot of options for things. My first, like, couple of days there, I generally eat close to the paleo diet, and so I was like, okay, like, I'm just gonna eat these sweet potatoes and this chicken and this salad, and, like, I'll be great. And then, like, I got, like, a day in, and they run you everywhere, and I was just like, I don't have any energy. I'm so hungry. Your meal times are never the same, so you don't know exactly when the next meal is coming. You know it's coming, but you don't know what time. So you end up just piling as much food as you could possibly get, and it was like, all right, well, I'm going to eat the lasagna because I don't normally eat lasagna, but if I don't eat that, I'm going to die today. I won't have energy to do anything. So
when you're there in August, I was there in June, it's like, you're in San Antonio, it's frickin'... I never ate so much in my life, and I lost almost 20 pounds.
Yeah, you lose weight from sweating, you lose weight from everything else. They make sure you drink so much water, so it's like you're actually more hydrated, and your body, like, functions better than it normally does, just because, like, they're breathing down your neck, making you drink water. So it, like, the food wasn't bad at all, no complaints. They even, like, when you go in for dinner, you, like, pick up a protein bar and you take it back to your dorm, and you have, like, a snack before bed. So they make sure that, I mean, you're taken care of. But
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've got 3 awesome basic training stories, but I'll share them for the bonus episode.
Perfect.
Oh, good.
That were sort of unforgettable. And so I want to, you look at your bio, and I see that 3 people that your influential teachers are 3 dear friends of mine. And so I want to hit you up about that list of 3. But before we do that, I want to tell you, Andrew, I can't remember when the last time was we talked about this, but Houchin Horns aims to spread the joy of music through providing the highest level of products, services, and resources to the brass playing community. I can't remember when I
actually,
that?
I figured that out on my own, but yes, you've also talked about it.
Okay, well, their premier brass pro shop with an impressive lineup of the best instruments, accessories, sheet music, and more. They stock the finest makes of instruments, including Adams, Bach, Conselmer, Eastman, Shires, Engelbert Schmidt, Paxman, Tyne, and Yamaha, among many others. Among, it's like the way you say among. With cool people say it that way, but I don't know if it's gotten to DC yet. They have mouthpieces by Giddings, Greg Black, Pickett, and many more. You can browse vintage and consignment instruments at houghtonhorns.com. And wait till I tell you this. This is so.
Should I avoid eye contact?
Avoid eye contact.
Okay.
If you enter the promo code Junkies11 at online checkout, you'll get $500 off of your purchase of a new instrument from houghtonhorns.com. Very special thanks to Mark Houchin for making that possible, and I apologize to my English teachers for my butchering of the English language.
Good. That was a good job considering what you have to work with. That was
That's a fair point.
And I don't mean the copy.
So now, Allison, you grew up in Burke, Virginia. You went to Lake
I
Braddock
did.
Secondary School. True?
True.
Who was your
Okay,
band
so
director?
True.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go for.
Roy Holder.
Roy Holder. So I thought you were going to say.
Roy and June are dear friends.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah.
See, we know the Holders real
They
well.
moved to Tennessee, unfortunately, but yeah, those two make me happy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a
they've
great
been there
couple
for
of
a
people.
while. They actually just had their first grandbaby, so.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then who was the other guy? Who was the guy that had the mustache?
Mike Lowley?
No.
Oh,
So-
Mr. Bean.
Yes,
Mr. Bean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lou Bean.
Lou Bean. Yeah,
Yeah, of
Lou's a
course.
super cool guy. Yep.
Yep.
He just
okay.
retired, I think, a year or so ago.
That
Oh my
is-
gosh.
That is correct.
That's how old I am. There you go.
Yep.
All right, so you list Jen Cox, Roger Barron, and Dr. Brian by God Bowman. So let's take them in order. Jen Cox, you met how and what was your experience with Jen? Jen, go.
Jen is my hero. I actually started out playing percussion, and my older brothers were in band and were also music majors, so our whole family just kind of was music oriented, and so my brothers had been taking private lessons for forever, and I kind of joined band in elementary school knowing that I was, go big or go home. I was going to take lessons, I was going to do competitions, I was going to do a bunch of stuff, and so I started on percussion and very quickly was underwhelmed by quarter notes on the bass drum and stuff like that, and it was just like, this is not exciting and not what I thought it was. And so I told my dad that I wanted to quit. And my dad said, well, we don't have quitters in our family. So you can either stick with what you're doing or you can change instruments. But if I changed instruments, my dad got to pick what I played. And so I obviously ended up saying goodbye to quarter notes in one direction and went to quarter notes in another direction.
And your dad was like, I want to make my daughter's life as awkward as possible for the rest of her life and force her to have to explain about an instrument that nobody's ever heard of and fewer people care about. That's the
Right.
one I want you to play.
Well, he picked euphonium because my grandfather played it and was very good at it, apparently.
Huh.
And he picked it because he said my mouth shape was the same as his. So my great-grandfather, so I guess he figured, my dad was a saxophone player, so I think he figured if you had fuller lips, you might as well put them to good use. And so he started me on euphonium.
This is one of the most fascinating origin stories that we have
I
heard.
know.
This is
Really
great.
crazy.
Great grandfathers and that's all. And so I'm sorry to interrupt you. What is your great grandfather's name?
Oh, I don't even know.
I probably went to school with him.
I don't know his name.
That sounds
My grandparents had all passed away by the time I was born. So I didn't even
Yeah.
I know my grandparents' name, but I never even knew them.
To be fair, I don't know a single one of my great grandparents' names either. I just thought maybe because he was a euphonium player and
he's the reason why my life is the way
Right.
it is right now. Yeah. No, I
Leonard
have no idea
Falcone.
what his name. Yeah, right.
To be
But-
fair, I don't know any of your great-grandparents' names either. So we're all on
good.
equal footing.
So we're all on the same page.
All right, so now you're on euphonium.
I'm on euphonium, and I had a knack for it, and because I could tell I was getting better as I was playing, I was more interested in continuing and like wanting to get really, really good. So I told my dad I wanted to start lessons. And my dad usually waited until we were in middle school to start us on lessons, private lessons. But I was really persistent. And so he just kind of started looking for, putting feelers out with music teachers at Lake Braddock. And Mike Wheeler actually taught trombone at Lake Braddock for a long time. And so he gave my dad Jen's number. And so then he called Jen and saw if she was taking on any new students. And I remember talking to her on the phone for the first time and just being like really excited that my teacher was like a girl euphonium player, because that was like very rare. And I went from percussion, which it's kind of rare to have female percussionists, to low brass, where it's kind of rare to have female low brass players. So that was really exciting for me. And I started taking lessons with Jen, and she teaches a lot like Mr. Barron teaches, because she was his student. So a lot of times we teach very similarly to the way we were taught. And something similar between she and Mr. Barron is if you give it your all for them, they will double that for you. They will push you extra hard, give you every opportunity in the world, really just set you up for success. So if you're willing and ready to work for it, they're there right behind you, kind of pushing you to the front of the line. I remember, like, I think I was in like 7th grade when I submitted for Falcone for the first time, and it was like, looking back on it now, it was like, why did I do that? Like, I was a little 7th grader. Like, I just do you know Dave Bandman?
Oh yeah.
So we went to Dave Bandman has a recording studio in his basement, and like he and Jen just sat back in the booth and were like, okay, start. And like I would start playing or whatever, and they'd be like, okay, we're going to do it again. And I just remember like not even knowing what I was doing, but like attempting to play through stuff. But she really pushed me to try things that now it's like, man, I'm so thankful that I always had that experience of doing more, doing extra. And I'm so grateful for that. And she was such a great role model for me. And when I got into high school, she and John, her husband, were trying to have a baby, and they were having a hard time. And so she decided to stop teaching, because she also has rheumatoid arthritis. So she had to kind of take stress out where she could take it out. And so she stopped teaching. And I remember getting this email from her that was sent to all of her students that was like, hey, I'm going to take a step back to focus on my health. And, I recommend that everybody go study with Mr. Barron. That was the email. And I sat there and I sobbed. And my parents came into, this is back when like laptops weren't that big a thing. So we had like a computer room in our house, and they came in and they were like, what is the matter? And I like was sobbing so hard I couldn't catch my breath. Aww. And like I
have to study with the principal euphoniums of the Navy band.
And it was just funny because my parents said they always liken it to like that was my true like first heartbreak, was like she's breaking up with me. And I was just like devastated by it. And I, at that point in time, Mr. Barron's son, Bobby, and I went to high school together. So I knew Mr. Barron. He was very familiar. Bobby is like a big brother to me. So it was like, it wasn't that I didn't want to study with Mr. Barron. It's that it wasn't my Jen, and so she was just such a hero to me. And that was really hard to kind of like, start studying with Mr. Barron. But that was like one of the best experiences of my life, because it was like Jen, but like even better in some ways, because he was pushing Bobby the same way he was pushing me. and I could see, okay, if I do what he says, if I listen to him, like, this is what happens when you listen to Mr. Barron. Like, this is what happens when, if I really take what he's saying to heart. And it was just kind of fun to just always kind of be on Bobby's heels of everything. He was a senior when I was a freshman. And by the time he got to UNT, my first year at UNT was supposed to be his last, but he had already gotten his job in the Navy band. So we were never at UNT together. But, Mr. Barron and Bobby were super influential in my my high school years of playing and everything. So
okay, let's pause there. There's a lot a lot of paths we can take. So how would you compare the well, first of all, what kind of relationship do you have with Jen now still?
Oh, well, she's like one of my bosses now. So that's kind of cool. I don't see her that often because she's not in a playing position anymore in the Air Force Band. She does more admin kind of things. So I see her every now and then when we have like a commander's call or something like that. And I see John, her husband, more often than I see her. But it's just kind of weird to work someplace where there are a lot of people still in the band that were mentors to me growing up. And Jen used to, call my parents up and say, like, hey, we have this guest artist coming in, this quintet coming in. I think it'd be really cool for Allie to come sit in on rehearsal and to meet them. And so sometimes I'd even get out of school for it. My parents were totally fine with her picking me up and taking me on bass. And, I got a lot of amazing opportunity just from her looking out for me, essentially. And, a lot of those people that were her friends in the band, her colleagues, they got to know me and became my mentors too, and my friends. And I really looked up to them. And a lot of them are still in the band. They're close to retirement, but that's just kind of cool to walk into a building that I've walked into 100 times. And it's like, oh, like, I work here now, this is really cool. And these people, they're still friendly, but it's like, oh, like, I get to be on your team now, like, I'm not just the kid that's
peer relationship
in here, Yeah, it's just really special to have that. And in my interview for my audition, there were a couple auditions that led up to the one that I ended up winning. There was an Army Field Band audition shortly before, earlier in 2019, and I didn't submit any recordings or anything for that. Yeah, and I didn't want that job, if that makes sense. That sounds so ridiculous for a euphonium player to be choosy about anything, but at that point in my life, we were out in California, my husband was in a regional band, I had a good teaching gig, and it was just like, in my interview, they asked about that, about the other auditions, and if I took them, and I said no, because I didn't want to be in the Army Field Band. I didn't want to be in, the Navy Band. I don't want to be in any other band but this one. And that the Air Force Band was so influential in kind of my upbringing and my development as a musician that it was like, no, if I'm going to turn my whole life upside down for anything, it's going to be for this band, not for any other one. So it's really special to be able to be a part of something that really shaped me, and a lot of the people like Jen that are still there at different capacities. It's like, oh, maybe I'll get to be that person for somebody young now, I'll get to be the
100%.
Person who
there's 100% chance you're going to be that.
Yeah, and it really invite the next generation into something like this where it's a very traditional setting, and if we're not careful, it goes away, and it's really important to get the next generation ready and excited to be a part of stuff like this. So, but that's my relationship with Jen.
That's pretty great. So I mean, I knew Jen as a student because I was when I was in the Air Force Band, I was working on a master's I was pursuing a master's which I never caught, and she was studying with Roger, and then joined the ceremonial band, and then John, her husband, I won the first student division of the Falcone 9 million years ago, and there were 3 of us in the student division. And John got either second or third place. He was, I think, a freshman or a sophomore in high school. Like, if we had been at the same age, I'm not sure that I would have won the first Falcone 9 million years ago. But so I've known those guys for freaking ever. And then Roger went to Michigan State. I went to Michigan State. So he kind of kept an eye on me over the years. And I don't know how many folks know Roger. Roger is not known for a soft touch. If you never ever have to wonder what Roger is thinking. He's very direct, and if he believes in you, there's nobody else you'd rather have on your team, because he'll light up any fire to get to make sure that you get your due in whatever your due. He's very devoted to his students.
He's the most honest teacher I think I've ever had, and
said.
It goes both ways. You know, he's not going to sugarcoat it if you, like, if I didn't practice or something like that and I showed up to a lesson, I'd sound a certain way and he'd immediately say, like, okay, what's going on? And, I'd say, well, I had this, that, and the other thing going on. I didn't practice. And then we'd go from there. But it was like, he's not going to teach me the same way that lesson that he'd teach me if I was on fire, if I had the best week ever. Then he's really going to spur me on, and if I didn't practice, or it just wasn't going well in a lesson, then it's kind of like, okay, we pivot, we regroup, and he kind of would meet me where I was, but at the same time remind me, like, hey, you said you wanted to get here, so, like, cut this out, this is this week, but from now on, like, you got to get back on,
Right. Yeah.
And he's extremely honest. He can be a softie. It's just you.
Oh, yeah. You got to get there.
Yeah.
Well, you got to build the trust, and you got to build the lines of communication.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that you can get to that point. I'm trying to place you up. So I'm guessing you graduated from high school in the early 2000s?
2010.
Like I said, mid 2000s. No, 2010. Because I was trying to place you because my ex-wife used to play for solo and ensemble. She accompanied Bobby a few times, but
what
he
was
was
her
like Stephanie LaDuke at the time.
Okay. Yeah,
But,
I don't.
well, actually,
that doesn't
still
ring a
at this
bell.
time, actually, still her name. Yeah, still her name. Not my wife, but still her name. So, remember before it got awkward? Me neither. Okay, so my question to you then is, before we start talking about Brian, major sort of differences or similarities between Jen and Roger, because in one instance they're very different people, but she had studied with, now you're going to study with her teacher, and sometimes, a different thing happens when you're once removed versus being in the room with. And so what was that experience like?
The concepts were all the same, but the pedagogy and approach to pedagogy was different. So, my warm-up routine, my goals, what I really should be thinking about when I play, and those kinds of things, it was like a seamless transition to Mr. Barron. It just was, I didn't have to adjust hardly at all for stuff like that. Mr. Barron definitely demanded a lot more from me and really made me think hard about things. And Jen would do the same thing, but it was more of like a brainstorming collective thing with like the two of us. Like, she would kind of present me with a lot of options and kind of like wait to see like what I gravitated towards. Whereas, Mr. Barron would lay it all out on the table and just said like, hey, this is what's true. And like, you gotta figure out what that means to you, like, what is that? If I tell you this, how are you going to respond? Or, are you going to get up or are you going to get defeated? Like, what's going to happen if I tell you these things? you know, and because he's going to tell you the truth, you know. So it was just a little more direct, I guess, with Mr. Barron. I still, to this day, think that he's probably the best teacher I've ever had. And he just really, really makes you think about things and kind of encourages you to do the work on yourself, not only as a musician, but as a person, and kind of making sure you realize that the two are connected. You know, if things are a mess in your personal life and your real life, whatever, well, then forget your practice session, you know? And he was just really, really good about making sure that everything was whole, complete. It's not just your music lesson, this is your life lesson. How can what you're doing here in your lesson be translated to the rest of your life? And how can what you're doing with the rest of your life be translated into your lesson? And just kind of realizing things about your progress as a musician, you know, like when people exercise or they have fitness goals, it's not like they just go to the gym once and it's like, oh, you know, I'm the master of all now. You really have to work and train and sweat and just kind of, it's a slow process to kind of achieve your goals. And it's like those kind of metaphorical things, he was really good about relating other parts of your life to playing euphonium, where you kind of looked at it and you're like, man, I am way overthinking this on euphonium. Like, I don't think this way in other aspects of my life where it's the same process. And a lot of that, he was constantly teaching that and speaking that truth throughout all of our lessons. And I really don't think it was until I was even out of UNT that I really started like processing that and like realizing what that really meant. But, you know, that just is a testament to what a good teacher he is he knows at the time, I mean, when you're 17, 18 years old, like, I wasn't processing every little thing he had to say, but I heard it and I held on to it. And later in my life, when I did have the capacity or the context in life to be like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what he was talking about. And if I hadn't had that, then that wouldn't have helped me later in my life. So while I didn't necessarily apply it while I was studying with him, it was something that stuck with me long after my final lesson with him. So,
but it's just so much. I mean, first of all, I'm just sort of a junkie for this stuff because, you know, we're
a brass junkie.
I'm back in the lineage, but so it's fascinating and fun for me personally, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Brian, but at the same time, there's a really interesting part of your story, which is that you were teaching full time before you took the audition. So I want to get into that, and if we have time to talk about Brian, awesome. We might save it for another time or for the bonus episode. But before we do that, I want to let you know that we want to send out a very special thanks to the Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University in beautiful and sunny Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's freaking hot here. It's freaking hot everywhere right now. So if you would be so kind as to go to the show notes for this episode, click on the link. You'll be taken to a page where you can find out all the folks you can study with at Duquesne University and the Mary Papert School, Argadas Motonis on euphonium, and I think Argadas is still there, but James Gourlay for sure. I know James Gourlay is teaching tuba and many, maybe, or all of the euphoniums. Anyway, you should go find out what's going on there and the ensembles you can be involved in. And a very, 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 very special thanks to Jim, always sweaty, Nova, for making that possible.
Always sweaty.
It's kind of
There
gross.
you go. Yeah, AS. I like it. Yep. The always. How about always super sweaty? See what I did there? All right. So I host through Hitz Academy. I host a series of events called Winning the Audition, which you would actually be a great person to feature on that. But I'm a lot of the which is all about getting people to talk about their audition preparation and then actually taking the audition. And one big struggle that people tend to have is that if they are not obnoxiously lucky to win an audition while they're still in school, when it feels busy, but it's not actually all that busy, relatively speaking, for most people. That, you know, you had a full-time job, and you still successfully prepared for and won a premier DC, you know, military band audition. That's really, I doubt that that's unprecedented, but that hasn't happened that many times. That's very impressive. So how did you carve out the time to be able to, was it that you were just really efficient, or did you just not sleep, or how did you kind of navigate that?
It was kind of a process of just kind of figuring out what was important to me. And when I graduated from UNT, I did my bachelor's and my master's there, and my final year there, I actually got into Falcone and placed third. So I kind of felt like I was at the top of my game. And my husband had just won a job in the Band of the Golden West out at Travis Air Force Base in California. So he had just joined the Air Force, and so we had just gotten engaged, and, you know, at that point in my life, it was like, okay, you know, I'm going to do Falcone. The day I got back from Falcone was my first day of teaching.
Wow.
And it was really tough to get a job in California just because the credentials don't always match up or transfer. So I had a Texas teaching credential, and I had to do a whole bunch of hoop jumping to get a job in California. And the school that I got hired at, I was like one of the only people that applied there because it was in the middle of nowhere in California.
Okay.
And I was just really lucky that they didn't care that I didn't have a California teaching credential. They just cared that I was applying. And so my first teaching job was really, really rough. And at the time, because it was so far away, I lived about an hour and a half away from my husband Tom, where he was stationed. So he had his own place down close to the base, and I was living an hour and a half away and teaching. And it was just a really busy time of life. And I played periodically through that year. And then my second year of teaching, I had gotten married, so I moved in with my husband, and then found a job teaching closer to the base. And that job was split. My first job was high school. My second one was split, half middle school, half elementary. And so it was just a lot of planning and figuring things out. And I had to kind of do it all on the spot, because you can't make plans until you figure out where the kids are. You know, you have to figure out what they know, what they don't know. And so a lot of it was just in the moment, kind of, you know, thinking on the fly. And that year, I didn't touch my euphonium at all. And so my entire second year of teaching, playing just was not a priority because survival was a priority.
Wow.
And so then, you know, I just felt really unhappy. You know, it was like a really demanding job, and, you know, I just wasn't feeling it. And so I switched schools yet again and went to Fairfield Sassoon School District. And when I got there, it was only one school, but the school was K through 8. So that was, like, better that it was all on one campus. And they had a curriculum that they wanted me to use for elementary. So that was nice because I didn't have to come up with as much stuff from my own head or whatever. So that was better. And I said, you know, I think I would be happier if I got back into playing. So I joined a brass band, Joyous Brass, out in Sacramento, California. They're a Salvation Army-based brass band, so I joined their band, and I joined Solano Winds, which was a community wind band in Solano County where we lived. So I joined those two groups, and immediately felt better because I was playing more. I was busier because I had more rehearsals to go to and everything, but I definitely felt like that part of my life was really essential to me just feeling like a fully functioning human. So I started playing more and more. Solano Winds kind of asked me to do a solo with them, and I hadn't done that since I was in high school, like solo in front of a band. And that's actually, no, that's not true, because I had to do that at Falcone, but it had just been a while. And that is kind of what kickstarted me back into, like, you know, I really do think, like, I think that, one, I'm pretty good, and two, I can get better. So I just kind of started setting goals for myself again, and working on stuff, and these auditions came up, and when I was preparing for the auditions, I kind of had to think about, well, do I want to take lessons? Like, we're all the way out in California, so it's like, okay, it sounds so silly because now that's like basically all we do is Skype lessons and things like that, where, you know, back then before COVID, it was like, well, it's not the same as, you know, showing up to someone's office and taking a lesson. And I kind of thought about it, and I was like, well, do I want to reach out? You know, a lot of our friends are here in DC. Like, do I want to ask them for their opinions, that kind of thing? And I thought to myself, you know, I've been doing this long enough, and I've had enough feedback from people that I know and I trust that they're not going to tell me anything I haven't heard before. And then now it's really up to me to apply that. And it's up to me to kind of be my own coach and my own teacher and take responsibility and really do the hard work of listening to what I'm playing rather than just putting it out there and waiting for feedback. Like, no, I have to provide my own feedback and and, you know, living with another euphonium player, sometimes you get the feedback anyway, and it's like, thank you, I know. Or, you know, from the kitchen, you just hear laughter or like, what was that? Or something like that, you know. Sometimes you get the feedback when you aren't really wanting it anyway. But, you know, I thought, okay, no, I'm not going to do lessons. I'm really going to see if I can get this on my own. And like what happens when I really take, in Mr. Barron's words, ownership. I really take ownership of my playing. What happens when I do that? And I think up until 2019, I'd taken 5 euphonium auditions, and I started taking them when I was in high school, and I had no business taking them just because I wanted to get to know the experience and kind of stare the beast in the face and just say, all right, I'm not afraid of you. So
there's value in that.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't hurt anything for sure. Mm-hmm. So
that's why Jen had you record an audition tape for Falcone in 7th grade.
Yeah,
that was the
exactly.
gift she was doing for you.
Yep.
Exactly. So just, you know, it's really special when someone sees potential. You know, I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but there is potential there, and because there is potential, we kind of water that seed and see what happens. But yeah, preparing for that audition, there were 2 spots. There was an audition in May, and there were 2 spots open. One was Jen's spot, so she had moved out of concert band. Someone from ceremonial brass had moved into concert band, and so there was a ceremonial brass spot open. And then they added another spot because the ceremonial brass was just getting overloaded with jobs, and the euphonium players didn't have like the right proportions compared to the other sections. So where for like every 2 jobs that like a horn player was playing, euphonium players were doing 3. So it was just like extra. We were doing extra. So they created another spot in the ceremonial brass. So there was 2 spots open. And that audition was the first time I've ever advanced out of the first round for an audition. So that automatically felt different because it was like, oh man, like any other time I've taken an audition, first of all, I was way more nervous. And I think I was a lot younger then too. I'm 30 now, but like when I was, my first audition I took was when I was like 18. I was still in high school. So it wasn't as nerve-wracking that time, but I think a lot of it also had to do with me just being older, not caring. Like, not that sounds really terrible. I did care. I really did care. That's why I was auditioning. But, I had nothing to lose. I was happy in California, like, teaching. I was finally in a good school district where, like, I felt valued, and, it just was a good spot. So it's like, okay, like, I could continue my life the way it's going, and I think I'd live a happy and fulfilled life. And I think that took a lot of pressure off of me for that audition versus being, a senior in college, and then it's like, okay, well, like, what do I do? If I don't get this job, then do I start my master's? Do I start teaching? Like, what do I do? So there was a lot less pressure for me in that respect. And, for my husband, even less pressure because he already had a playing job. It was just a different kind of job for him. So we both just went into it really kind of, loose and, well, we'll see what happens. And our friend, Tom's best friend, is actually Chris McGinty, who got that job. And have you interviewed him yet?
Mm-mm.
His audition story is the craziest story that I've ever heard in my life. Like, he was so good that they, like, asked him to play, like, 2 things in every round. And, like, that was enough because they're like, this guy is unreal. Like, we don't need to hear more. But, like, he interpreted it as, like, he was getting cut. And so he would leave, like, the rounds of the audition and just be, like, devastated. And, like, we had heard him play and everything. And it's like, that guy's a monster. Like, what do you mean? And, like, he just like, no, man, I bombed. They didn't even ask me sight reading. I didn't even get through all the excerpts. And he was just, like, devastated. And John Cox was proctoring for that audition. And, like, Chris was, like, packing up, getting ready to leave just because he thought he tanked. And John's, like, chasing him down through, like, the Air Force Band building. And he's like, wait, come back. Like, no, don't go. Like, you're through to the next round. Don't go. And he won that audition. And there were 2 spots, but they only hired one that day because everybody was good. And, like, that's something with euphonium auditions that I think is really frustrating compared to, like, other instruments, is because you have way more qualified euphonium players in the universe than there are euphonium jobs. It's just, like, that day, like, whatever you ate for breakfast, whatever it is, like, the magic combination, it worked for you that day, but who knows if you auditioned the next day, would you have gotten it? Who knows? It could have been somebody else's day, you know? And Chris, everyone was really good at that audition, but Chris was just, like, on another level. And so they said, we could only, like, nobody compares to this guy for this audition. Like, what we're hearing today, nobody's on this level, so we're just going to hire one. So they hired one, they hired Chris, and then they said, we'll audition the second spot in a couple months. And they pushed it off to September. And that's the audition that I ended up winning. And that experience was just, like, it was just what I needed, because it was like, no, I trusted myself, and I was kind of doing it by myself, for myself, and the rep was the same rep for both auditions. And so I was like, all right, I made it out of the first round. I didn't make it into the final round. So, like, let's see what else I can do. And I was like, I've got a couple months to really, like, to light a fire under my feet and just figure this out, because, I don't have to, like, do the woodshed kind of learning excerpts from scratch kind of thing. And you get to a certain point where there's not an excerpt you haven't seen or played before. You get to a certain point where it's like, oh yeah, I played this one for this Wind Studies audition like 5 years ago or whatever. Like, I just got to polish it up. And so it was like, all right, this is my opportunity to really, like, they've heard what I played in May. How much better can I get till September? And, like, how much more work can I put in and, like, get into the real nitty-gritty details of things? And just kind of focus on what I can do that's more. What more can I do for this? And I took the same approach. Didn't play for anybody, didn't want to know anybody's opinion, that kind of thing. It was just kind of like, no, if I can call myself a professional euphonium player, I should be able to teach myself. I should be able to coach myself through this. And it ended up working pretty well. I would, because I was still teaching at the time, I had a 0 period jazz band, so I'd get to school pretty early in the morning, and I'd open up the classroom and just practice in my office, do a little warm up, and wait for the kids to come. And my prep periods, my off periods of teaching where you prep. Sometimes I did really have to do a lot of prep. So sometimes I had the period or part of the period to just run through stuff, or I didn't, and I just had to make copies or rearrange chairs or all kinds of things. So sometimes I had that time, sometimes I didn't. My school was in the neighborhood we lived in, so I always went home for lunch. So that was kind of helpful too. I just went home, made something real quick for lunch, and then would practice at home, come back to school, and then I'd stay, however late I needed to stay that day, and then I'd come home and make dinner, and then it was okay, if I wasn't too exhausted to practice, then I get some practicing in, but it was more lots of really tiny practice sessions.
You made the time. You found it. You didn't wait for it to find you.
Yeah, and I could have made more, but I think I would have been so exhausted that I would have resented the whole experience. I would have felt like a slave to it, and I didn't want that. And it was all right, I literally have 10 minutes before my next class comes. What can I do in that time? Okay, well, I'm just going to focus on the solo from Whole Suite. That's something, most people have memorized. So it's okay, I don't even need to take music out. I just have my horn. I'm going to run through it. Just kind of work on things that way of okay, I have this much time. What can I be productive with in this tiny amount of time that I'm given?
That's great.
But yeah, you find, I think that's I'm going to be giving a masterclass talk about it for Stars and Shipes coming up in a week or so. But I'm talking on that masterclass about practice techniques and practice mentality. And I think something that we don't realize soon enough is that it's just the rest of our life, nothing is one size fits all, and neither is practicing. And this crazy mentality of oh, you have to practice 8 hours a day or you're never going to make it. Well, that's not true, because I'm an example of that, and the times when I did live that way, I was burnt out, and it wasn't true. And I feel we really need to tell people no, you just have to figure out what works for you. You've got to figure out, what you have in your schedule, and, sometimes less is more in a lot of ways. So
that's great. That's an important message that you just shared, which is it's not, you said you could have worked harder. Anyone can always work harder, always. I mean, but you said that it would have, almost surely led to you resenting the process and wouldn't have been, and that ends up having, I don't care who you are, that ends up having emotional consequences. That ends up having, if it's long enough, it ends up having physical consequences. I mean,
sure.
It manifests itself in a lot of ways other than you just not really digging it that much. And so, yeah. And it's a cliche, but the work smarter, not harder. But I think a lot of times that we can just use the metric of like X number of hours a day is not as good as X plus 1 hours a day, and that's just not
Right.
it's just not true. Yeah, it's just not true. And but we could talk about that for like another few hours because there's a lot to practicing. But this has been awesome, Allison. Thank you so much. This has been great. Lance, is there anything major that we're missing here before we have her stick around for the bonus episode?
No, I mean we should for sure talk about Brian in the bonus episode, but I really wanted to make sure that we got that last story out. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing, and we've talked with a number of Brian's students, and Brian's been on one of our events in the past. So,
Yep.
If anybody knows any euphonium players, it's probably Brian.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that we got to talk about some of these other voices.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, so if you would like to hear the bonus episode with Allison and with a whole host of other euphonium players, and we even let the trumpets in, and tubas and horn, all of the instruments, you can go to patreon.com/thebrassjunkies, and we have every single guest hangs out for a little bit extra for the bonus episode, which always releases the week after. It's the week in between the actual episodes. So if you were listening to this the day it's released, you can hear a little bit more of Allison 1 week from today. And again, that's at patreon.com/thebrassjunkies. And Allison, thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Really
And
great.
that is going to do it for another episode of The Brass Junkies. All right. How about that, Lance?
That was pretty fun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it brought back a ton of memories. Like all the basic training stuff was vivid. That was a thing that you don't easily forget. I just remember being bored more than anything, but
a
it was
world
fun to hear it through her
I just
perspective.
can't imagine it, and I've heard it described in such detail by so many people now. I just can't imagine it.
Yeah, and actually, you know what I anticipated. This doesn't have to be all about basic training, and nor should it be. But I thought that the physical part of it was going to be harder. I didn't find it. I mean, granted, I'm the peak of fitness, but I didn't find it to be as. I was much more nervous about it than I needed to be.
Hey, what would basic training for Boston Brass look like if there was a basic training for Boston Brass?
It would meet in the bar.
It would. See, I'm thinking it would be in an airport. I'm
Airport
thinking
bar.
that it would be that it would be like, navigating like canceled flights and damaged horns and
There's the horn repair problem. There's the can't find your music problem. There's the your plane was canceled problem. There's no good food options problem.
crazy presenter.
Crazy presenter is a good one.
Most of them were not. Most of them were great, but then there was the occasional. I'm looking at you, Portsmouth, Virginia. That was like almost 20 years ago. I don't mean this in no bad way, but I don't think that I don't think he's gonna hear it.
I think that's true too.
That was way before you were in the band, actually.
Well, there was one overseas as well. I remember at a brass festival.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those kinds of things, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
interpersonal communication.
Right.
The interpersonal communication Mad Lib.
I think that you should have to deal with me, even though I'm not in the band anymore. When I'm hungry, and I'm upset about something else, and I'm missing home, and I don't have enough sleep. Mm-hmm. If you can do that, you're pretty. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Like that's you'll probably be fine if you do that. I also enjoyed hearing Allison talk about, but it's funny that we didn't have her go because we ran out of time. We didn't ever talk about Brian Bowman, which was totally the teacher to skip. The reason I say that is because it's so well documented. His reach is just so huge, and even just on our show alone, we've had so many people talk about that. And we had him on for our Euphonium, workshop. Like he's wonderful, but the world is not necessarily, is not in desperate need of more insights into his teaching, which is a testament to him, by the way, because he's beloved and has students everywhere doing all of the things. But it was cool hearing just the various, the
Jen
differences
Cox and
Roger.
Roger. Just even David Banman. We didn't spend too much time talking about Dave Banman. But a really cool player, very creative guy. He's put out an amazing output of just really interesting, cool jazz music. It's just, I'm glad that we got to highlight some other American players that not everybody maybe necessarily knows. Probably, if you've heard of any of those three, it was probably Roger, if you're of a certain age. But then, the others. I was glad we got to go there too.
Yeah, good stuff. So you just saw Boston Brass.
How about that?
Before we close, yeah. How many of them asked about me?
An equal number.
An equal number.
Yes.
It was like, it was
one
of
them
those...
asked about you. No, I don't think. I'm trying to remember. It was just. It was at the American Band College. They were the featured artists on the 4th of July concert, and it's a summer program for working band directors to get their master's degree. Andrew and I have both been there many times. Huge fans of what they do. Started by Max McKee, who's actually piecing out. He says he's piecing out. He did one clinic. He's been doing it for, I want to say 54 years in one capacity or another. I mean, it was a thing before it was ABC.
Right.
But and then Scott, his son, is now taken over running it, and just the staff is awesome, and it's just a great event and very familial atmosphere. So it was very fun. So there was a commencement thing on Saturday, and I did a lot of the talking and sang some songs, and then those guys played, and then Sunday night there was a 2-hour show. They were the featured guests. I was the MC for the whole thing, sang some songs. Did it actually, if you go on my Facebook page, there's a photo of me playing with Will and Jose on a song called the Trying to Teach Band During COVID Blues. But it was very fun. It was just, swapping, like instantly sharing stories that Domingo and Will were like losing their minds over, because it was just like all this nonsense came back. It was like a bunch of puppies that were kind of recently released into the same yard, just were like going completely nonsensical. Very fun. It was just
That's great.
A hoot. Yeah, they sounded great. It was just really fun to be on the other side of the stage from them, and just to hear it, sitting literally in the front row to hear them playing was just a hoot. Yeah, very, very fun.
That's great.
Yep.
Good stuff. I would have gone, but that would have involved a plane ride, and I'm enjoying my streak right now.
How about that?
Yeah, it was late January of 2020 was the last time I was on a plane. That's 18 months, almost 18 months.
Yeah.
That's good. I'd never gone in my 44 before that years. I'd never gone 12 months without being on a plane from the day I was born. Not one time. And now it's 18. I'm loving it. So.
I remember the feeling that I had when I lost my airline status after leaving Boston Brass. I was like one of the happiest days of my life.
I had circled for years that was one of my main goals, was to have no status with anyone at all, and I no longer have it with Hertz. I was I was 1K with United. I was platinum with Hilton. Yep, and it's all gone.
Poor us, Andrew. Poor us.
Oh, it's good. It means that I get to sleep in my own bed pretty much every night.
Yep.
Although I'm headed to the Berkshires, so yeah, which is good. Anyway.
I'm headed to the back porch.
Yeah, good. I'm headed to the wraparound porch. I just got to drive there. All right. Thank you, Lance, and thank you,
Andrew.
Thank you, Allison. This was really fun, and that is going to do it for another episode of The Brass Junkies. You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to hear the bonus episode featuring today's guest, please visit patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to learn how you can support the show and instantly access all bonus materials, as well as gain access to a special patron-only Facebook group. The Brass Junkies is produced by the amazing, wonderful, and truly inspirational Will Houchin. The theme music was composed by Fernando Dados and performed by Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. We are at Pray for Jens on Twitter and Instagram, and have a Facebook page at facebook.com/prayforjens. You can find out more about the Brass Junkies and all the other Pedal Note Media podcasts at pedalnotemedia.com. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.